For 70 years, naval doctrine held that controlling inland seas required warships, guns, radar, tonnage, and flag. The Black Sea and the Azov had been contested waters since the Age of Empire, and every power that sought to dominate them had built a fleet to do it. Russia inherited that logic from the Soviets, invested in it, and declared the Azov Sea an internal Russian body of water as recently as 2022. A proclamation backed by the presence of naval vessels, Coast Guard cutters, and the steady movement of cargo across the Kerch Strait. That declaration sounded definitive. It turned out to have an expiration date of roughly 3 years. This is not a story about ships being damaged. It is a story about what happens when a navy designed for the 20th century encounters a weapon designed for the 21st. And discovers that the gap between those two eras cannot be crossed by shooting back harder. In less than a single week beginning on the 6th of July, 75 Russian vessels were struck in the Azov Sea by Ukrainian maritime drones. 28 of them in a single night. How does a country with no surface fleet and no coastal artillery accomplish something that would strain a conventional naval power? And what does it mean for every other body of water where aging fleets still believe that size is protection? The answers are already being written. In fuel that never reached Crimea, in grain that will not be exported, and in the silence of ports that used to move commerce and now move nothing at all. The Azov Sea did not fall because Russia was careless. It fell because the logic of how you hold water has changed, and Russia has not changed with it. The weapon at the center of this story is a maritime drone. The specific variant most frequently attributed to these strikes is a development of Ukraine's Magura series, a surface UAV platform that has evolved steadily since the early phases of the war. The latest configuration can carry approximately 200 kilograms of payload, roughly equivalent to a mid-range cruise missile warhead, at speeds and altitudes that render conventional naval gunnery nearly useless against it. To put that in financial terms, the approximate production cost of one of these drones sits somewhere in the range of a few tens of thousands of dollars. The tankers and tugboats absorbing those strikes represent assets worth millions of dollars each, requiring months to build and replaceable only within a shipbuilding infrastructure that Russia, under sanctions, no longer fully controls. That exchange rate is not a tactical detail, it is the entire argument. But understanding the weapon alone does not explain what happened in the Azov over the span of less than 7 days. For that, you have to understand what the Azov Sea had become, and why Russia was so exposed when the strikes began. After the opening of full-scale war in February 2022, the land route connecting Russia to Crimea, the R-280 highway running south from Rostov-on-Don, was degraded steadily through Ukrainian long-range strikes. Bridges in the northern approaches to Crimea were hit repeatedly. Convoys using the road ran under persistent threat. As overland logistics became unreliable, Russian planners shifted a significant share of the resupply burden onto the sea. Tankers carried fuels south toward the Kerch Peninsula. Cargo vessels moved grain and general supplies through the Kerch Strait. The Azov became, in effect, the logistics artery of occupied southern Ukraine. This was, from a Ukrainian strategic standpoint, a concentration point. A predictable flow of high-value targets moving through a confined body of water with limited maneuvering room. And unlike the open Black Sea, the Azov is small enough, roughly 370 kilometers at its longest axis, that drone operators working from the Ukrainian coast or from positions in reach of the northern shore could maintain persistent pressure across a wide fraction of its surface. What Russia does not appear to have done is build a layered maritime defense around that logistical flow. Footage attributed to the Magura drone unit itself, released alongside strike videos, shows Russian vessels sitting essentially stationary in open water. No escort formations visible, no active countermeasures demonstrably in place. No naval defense corridor that could intercept the incoming drones before they closed within striking range. The ships were moving goods. They were not behaving like ships that expected to be shot at. Here is where the numbers become important. Ask yourself what it takes for a defending navy to neutralize a maritime drone attack. The drone is small. Its radar cross-section is minimal. It moves at the surface, which means radar designed for aerial threats struggles to track it cleanly against wave clutter. And if the attacking side is sending them in numbers, not one or two, but waves of them across a single night, the mathematical demand on any point defense system becomes severe very quickly. 28 successful strikes in a single night implies that drone launches significantly exceeded even that number. The intercept rate was evidently not high enough to matter. Russian naval assets capable of mounting a real defense, frigates, corvettes, missile boats, have been systematically pulled back. The Black Sea Fleet, based in Sevastopol, has suffered so many losses to Ukrainian naval drones and missile strikes since 2022 that its operational posture has contracted dramatically. Novorossiysk on the Russian coast has also seen strikes. The submarines that might once have been part of the strategic picture have been moved or kept in port. The surface fleet that could have escorted Azov cargo runs was not available to do so, because deploying it would have meant risking more of it. What you are watching, in other words, is a compounding effect. The Black Sea campaign degraded the fleet. The degraded fleet could not protect the Azov logistics route. The unprotected logistics route became the target. And once Ukraine established that the Azov was an operating environment where drones could strike freely, the tempo accelerated, because each successful strike demonstrated both the viability of the method and the absence of an effective counter. At this point in the video, think about what you know about your own country's naval doctrine, and ask honestly, would the assumptions underlying it survive this kind of pressure? The comment section is a useful place for that conversation. The economic dimension of what happened extends well beyond military hardware. Russia controls significant agricultural territory in the occupied regions of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and Donetsk. Grain harvested from those territories, harvested to be precise, from land that belonged to Ukrainian farmers before 2022, has been moving through the Kerch Strait aboard cargo vessels, entering global markets as Russian or otherwise origin grain. According to initial economic analysis cited in Ukrainian official communications, as much as 25% of Russia's grain export traffic passed through the Kerch Strait. That corridor is now operationally closed, not by Ukrainian warships, not by naval mines, not by any of the conventional instruments of a blockade, but by the credible threat of drone strike against any vessel attempting to use it. This creates an effect that operates simultaneously on three levels. At the military level, fuel and supplies are not reaching Crimea by sea. At the economic level, Russia is losing export revenue and facing internal supply chain stress, including reported fuel shortages in the Krasnodar region. And at the reputational level, a body of water that Putin formally declared an internal Russian sea, sovereign, controlled, a demonstration of what the war had achieved, is now one in which Russian commercial operators have suspended operations. The proclamation and the reality have separated in a way that is difficult to obscure. The Kerch Bridge remains. It is the last uninterrupted physical link between Russia and Crimea, and Ukraine's campaign has been systematically loading it toward its maximum capacity by eliminating every alternative. But the bridge carries its own risks. A train loaded with fuel represents a high-value, slow-moving target. A single successful drone strike on a loaded fuel train on that bridge could disable the crossing for an extended period. Russia, aware of this, has reportedly shifted toward truck-based fuel transport over the bridge rather than rail. Lower payload per crossing, slower overall throughput, but less catastrophic if a single vehicle is hit. The bridge is working. It is also working under a constraint it was never designed to operate under, serving as the sole lifeline for an entire peninsula. What makes this moment particularly significant is that Russia appears to have reached it without a viable response prepared. The pattern of strikes, 75 vessels in less than a week, an escalating nightly toll from 2 to 8 to 28, suggests not a series of opportunistic hits, but a sustained operational campaign. Ukrainian drone operators were not getting lucky. They were executing a method that had been tested, refined, and scaled. The Magura platform and its variants have been in development for over 2 years. The crews operating them have accumulated hundreds of operational hours. And the absence of effective Russian countermeasures is not an accident of one bad night. It is the cumulative result of a defensive posture that never adapted to the drone threat as it evolved. Russian military commentators, including state television personalities whose commentary reflects at minimum the concerns circulating in official circles, have begun publicly asking where the Navy is. Why were commercial vessels not escorted? Why the Azov has been effectively conceded? These are not the questions of a side that is managing the situation. They are the questions of a side that has lost something and is trying to assign responsibility after the fact. Simultaneously, the language in Moscow around the nature of the war itself has shifted. Senior figures, including Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, have begun describing the conflict not as a special military operation, the legal and rhetorical framing that has governed Russian communications since February 2022, but as a war. A full-scale war, defined by Russian commentary as one involving not just Ukraine, but the collective support infrastructure of Western nations. This rhetorical shift is not incidental, it is preparatory. It creates the legal and political space within Russia to take steps, mobilization, martial law, economic controls, that the special military operation framing does not easily accommodate. Ukrainian officials have publicly characterized this shift as preparation for a new mobilization announcement, likely following Russian parliamentary elections. The logic is simple. Russia is losing soldiers faster than volunteer recruitment can replace them, and the front lines in Donetsk are absorbing losses at a rate that current force generation cannot sustain indefinitely. But here is the thing worth sitting with before this story closes. Somewhere in the Azov Sea, on one of those nights, the night of 28 ships, or the night of 8, or one of the quieter nights before the campaign accelerated, there were sailors on those vessels. Not admirals, not planners, not the people who made the decision to use commercial tankers as the backbone of a military logistics chain without protecting them. Ordinary crew. The footage shows one of them standing on the deck of a struck vessel, filming on a phone as drones hit nearby. He can hear them before he sees them. He watches the water around him erupt, one ship at a time. He does not appear to be running. There is, in his stillness, something that reads less like courage and more like the paralysis of someone who has run out of categories for what is happening. The math of his situation is not complicated. The drones are not targeting him personally. They are targeting the vessel he is standing on, and there is nowhere to go. That image is what this campaign actually looks like, stripped of the strategic framing and the economic analysis. A man on a burning ship in an inland sea, filming because he cannot think of anything else to do, while the world his commanders told him was under control reveals that it is not. The lesson that emerges from the Azov campaign is not about drones specifically. It is about what happens when one side in a conflict accepts that cheap, networked, scalable systems can do what expensive, massed, conventionally structured forces cannot, and then actually builds and deploys those systems at scale, while the other side continues to plan around the world that used to exist. Russia built a logistics corridor on the assumption that the Azov was protected by the same logic that has governed maritime operations for a century, that controlling a sea requires owning the larger platforms. Ukraine bypassed that logic entirely. The question going forward splits in two directions. If Russia announces a new mobilization and pours additional manpower into the Donbas front lines, does that change the trajectory in ways that the drone campaigns cannot compensate for? Or does it simply increase the scale of attrition without changing the underlying dynamic? And if Russia does find a way to suppress the maritime drone campaign, whether through new technology or new defensive protocols, how quickly can Ukraine adapt to the next phase? The history of this war suggests that the adaptation cycle on the Ukrainian side has consistently been faster. But faster is not the same as unlimited. What do you think breaks first? Russia's ability to absorb this level of economic and logistical pressure, or Ukraine's ability to sustain the operational tempo that is generating it? Leave your answer in the comments, because the people reading them from multiple time zones are asking the same question with access to information this video cannot cover. If this analysis gave you something that the daily headlines did not, share it with one person who is trying to understand this war past the surface. Subscribe if you want the next piece the moment it lands. This is not the last chapter of this story, and the next one will matter.